discouraged about is that many of us are advocates of a mode of transportation, a specific mode of transportation, and many times those advocates are then not supporters of all modes of transportation. And if we are going to transform LA County and the state of California, we need our transportation experts, our transportation advocates, to be advocates for every form of transportation, starting with active transportation, right, with bikes and peds, going up to buses, going up to light rail, going up to heavy rail, going up to high-speed rail, going up to air transportation, going up to whatever is the next thing. We have to grow the transportation pot. We cannot think about transportation anymore as trying to get more of a singularly sized pot for a specific mode of transportation. We all collectively have to put our shoulders together to grow the transportation pot so that all of the modes can be brought together as a single living organism to solve our mobility needs. Because that's what it's going to take. We are not going to solve our mobility needs with any one mode of transportation. We are going to solve our mobility needs as a multimodal, living and breathing transportation system. And so to the extent that we can do that, we all win. We all win, right? Because if you look at different modes of transportation, they do different things very well, and we need to make sure that they do whatever that is that they do well, really, really well, and they don't try to do something they don't do well, right? Because when they try to do things that they don't do well, it costs us more money. And we don't have enough money to invest in transportation systems doing things that they don't do well, right? If you think about the cost of moving a person a mile, on a high-speed system, on an international basis, the cost of moving a person a mile is typically less than 20 cents. Right now, our inner-city commuter services are moving people at 40 cents, right? 35 and 40 cents a mile, which is okay for certain types of trips. But there's certainly an opportunity to bring in a different type of service to move people very efficiently from a region-to-region basis because it's good business sense, because it makes sense. And so those are the things, those are the synergies that we need to look at. Right now, we are running in Southern California, and it's wonderful, right? We're running Metrolink, we've got Coaster down south, we've got a Surfliner train, but at the end of the day, when a passenger goes to the station to take a trip, they don't really care what brand is spray painted on the side of that train. They only care that they can get on a train and they can go to the destination that they want to go to, and that that train is leaving at the time that they need to make that trip, and it will get them where they need to go to do whatever it is they want to do, and that there is a train there to take them back at the end of that trip. That's all they care about. And we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to have a renaissance within our transportation services here in Southern California right now, because we have leaders at our transportation departments who understand this, who understand that ultimately at the end of the day it's about customer service. And it's about running trains or buses or having bikes or having rideshare or whatever that mode of transportation is, having it where it needs to be when somebody needs to take that trip, and having it be able to deliver them to the destination of that trip, and having it then be able to return them back where they started in a convenient way. You know, if you look at Southern California right now, it is very, very difficult to take a train to do a midday meeting, right? If you're in LA or Orange County or anywhere that you are in Southern California, it's very difficult to take a train to do a midday meeting because there are not that many trains. There's some in the morning, there's some in the evening, they're not in the middle of the day. So to go down for an hour meeting from LA to Orange County, you could need to spend 5 hours, depending on when the trains are running, right? If you wanted to go from, let's say, Riverside into Los Angeles, you want to come up here for a Dodger game. There aren't trains leaving here at the end of the Dodger game, right? You can go in for the first 2 innings and then you've got to leave, right, if you want to take a train. Those are the types of things that we need to be working on today. Like, we need to be working on our transportation issue and part it out in terms of what we need to be working on today, those short-term improvements, the mid-term improvements, right? How do you do some of those bigger things that we need to do, and then the long-term improvements. And that long-term improvement is bringing high-speed rail into the state of California. But it's bringing it in a collaborative way so that it complements our existing transportation system, and it does what it does best, and it allows the other services to continue to do what they do best. That is critical. We need to look at our bookends, right? Our Northern California and our Southern California urban population areas, and we need to identify high-capacity urban corridors. We need to look at that low sand corridor as a high-capacity urban corridor. And we need to make improvements to it so that it can do it, and so that someday high-speed rail can also operate within that corridor. We need to make these corridors better neighbors. We need to make these corridors safer by grade separating them. And we need to do the things that we need to do within these corridors to improve the speed for existing services right now, because you know, and I know there's controversy among you, so I'm going to be a little agnostic on this, but you know that the state of California and that Metrolink is ordering new locomotives. Those locomotives could probably pull trains between 110 and 125 miles per hour if we could upgrade these corridors so that they could do that safely. And that's something we ought to be all working on. In order to do that, we're also going to have to re-signal those corridors. We're going to have to decrease the spacing between the signals so that you can run more trains in those corridors. And those are things that we should be looking at in terms of what we're doing moving forward to create these true people delivery systems. That's what we want to do. We want to deliver people between the counties within Southern California, and we want to deliver people to the Central Valley and to Northern California. That's what we want to build, because the easier we can move people around the state of California, the easier we can deploy people to do really big and amazing things. We can move them very easily to Silicon Valley to do big and amazing things. We can move them very easily up to Palmdale. Now, I think most of you might be aware, you know, that Palmdale, Northrop announced that they're going to build planes up in Palmdale. We can move people around, right, to make sure that they've got the people up there to do that kind of work. Because in this century, it's going to be about mobility. Our success is going to be based on our ability to gather the best and the brightest around the state in areas to work on hard problems. It's about the creative class and the intersection between technology, right, and entertainment and media and art and design. Those are the types of things we want to do, and in order to do that, we need to be mobile. So that's what I would tell you. We know the population is changing. We know the population, and population preferences are changing. We know that by the middle of the century, we'll have 50 million people in the state of California. We know that today we have 200 million people visiting our state every year, right? We need to be able to move those people effectively. We also know that we're having demographic changes. We know that right now in the world, half the people in the world live in cities. This is the century of the metropolitan area. Half the people live in cities, right? And so we know that those city dwellers look at transportation in a different way. And we need to make sure that we're building a system that can address that. We know that our millennial generation is much more interested in transit than our previous generations. You know, we know that our 16-year-olds are not all lined up at the DMV anymore to get their license. They're not, right? They're doing other things, and that's a good thing. And what we need to look at is we need to look at interesting intersections between our generations, because our boomers grew up, right, and loved their cars. They may love trains too, but they loved their cars. But as we move forward in this century, some of those people are not going to be able to drive anymore. So they're going to be in a position where they're going to favor transit. And if we've got a millennial generation, who, by the way, is the largest generation ever, there are more millennials than boomers. Those Gen Xers, of which I'm one, you know, we kind of fell down a little bit. You know, there was about 80 million boomers, there was 60 million Gen Xers. Well, there's 85 million millennials. It's the biggest generation ever. And if there is a direct intersection between the needs of the millennials and the needs of the boomers, that's something that we need to be looking at and making sure that we're taking advantage of when we try to find people to put their shoulder against building transportation or improving or repairing existing transportation. And I think that's key too. We can't just build new things. We need to make sure what we've got is in a state of good repair. And so the state of California does have a statewide rail modernization initiative underway to make sure that we're making those improvements within the state that are really, really important, and we're keeping everybody as safe as we can possibly keep them. So what I would say to you is things are going well. Not everything maybe, but things are going well. We are moving forward. The high-speed rail system, the high-speed rail project is building the Fresno River Bridge right now. It is the first vertical structure on the project. We do have $2.2 billion in construction contracts awarded right now. We are targeting to award the next construction contract in January of 2016. There is a plan to bring on, in a phased approach over that first part of 2016, those first 6 months of 2016, multiple construction sites, so that by the end by June of 2016, there's construction going literally all over the Central Valley, so that there is no doubt that high-speed rail is being built in the state of California. That is what's going on. Here in Southern California, we still have the very, very hard work of identifying all of the routes that we would be taking in order to certify those environmentally so that we could build those. We have a sort of bipolar system in the Southern California area, if you will. We have what I call getting to LA, which is Bakersfield to Burbank, and then we have getting through LA, which is Burbank to Anaheim. Getting to LA is very much a greenfields project. We're going across the Tehachapis, we're going across the San Gabriel Mountains to get into the San Fernando Valley. That is where there are very, very hard decisions and lots of work to be done to identify the routes that we will take. We've made some good progress over the course of the last couple of years, and the reason you all know is because you see us in the paper all the time. that means we're making progress. That means we are out there doing the hard work to figure out where we're building high-speed rail. When we get to Burbank, it's all about building a high-capacity urban corridor. That's the project from Burbank down to Anaheim. We will be paralleling the existing low-sand corridor, and our goal there is to create a high-capacity urban corridor to increase the speed that those trains can operate right now, hopefully up to 125 between Burbank and LA, and to 110 between LA and Anaheim. All trains, not just high-speed trains. To seal that corridor, to put up fencing with SCADA systems so that you have intrusion warning so that kids and animals cannot get in those corridors and get hurt, to grade separate those corridors so that we don't have people getting in front of trains. That's just not acceptable here in Southern California, and it happens much, much more often than we would like it. If we can do that, those corridors are better neighbors. They're quieter neighbors with the upgrades in the tracks, the continuously welded tracks. They are much quieter with the new Tier 4 locomotives that are coming in and the new Amtrak locos. Those are quieter than the existing services and emit less greenhouse gas. So we're creating these high-capacity urban corridors that can really make a difference for us. And really, really importantly, and I'll close on something that you talked about, Paul, because I think the big idea here in Southern California is script, certainly, but there's one other piece to it. The big idea in Southern California is script plus Rosecrans-Marquardt grade separation. That is an amazing package of projects that changes the way our trains, our existing trains operate right now. Because with Rosecrans-Marquardt grade separation, we complete the triple track. And when we complete the triple track, we unlock an additional 20 slots for passenger service through this high-capacity urban corridor. I know they never thought we'd do it, right? BN, they never thought Metrolink would do it, so they signed off in the 1990s. We'll give you 20 more, right? If you complete the triple track, we're going to complete it. And so with those two projects, run through tracks here at Union Station, so it's a dwell station. Trains can go and get in and out of Union Station in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, every train, every time, potentially, if we upgrade the signaling, right? And we finish the triple track so we can run 20 more trains a day, because right now, LoSAN's long-term goal is to run 18 trains a day, right? Not 11. That's where those slots for those 7 more trains come from. Riverside is extending their service right now down to Paris Valley. And in order to run all of the service that they want to run all the way through the system, they need those slots. Those slots impact people coming in from the Inland Empire too. And so if in the short term, and I assure you they are far from dead, if you take a look at some of the stuff that's been going on at the Metro Board, we, High Speed Rail, are coming together with LA Metro so that we can jointly advance the script project. We are working closely with LA Metro so that we can jointly advance the Rosecrans-Marquardt project, because we, High Speed Rail, need both of those projects. And so if we can invest some of our money to help Metro advance those projects, and those projects could be done by the end of this decade, and you could start using them and we could start improving our system, that's a good deal. Because ultimately, the more riders we have on the existing system, the more riders will be there on the platform day one when High Speed Rail is ready to run that first train from south to north. So that's what I think we need to take a look at. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication. Building big infrastructure projects are not easy. There are critics about everything we do, obviously, right? People running right behind us to make sure, right, that we're thinking about all of the things that we need to do correctly. That's okay, but we need to make sure that they don't stop progress. We have to keep moving forward. And it literally takes every one of you and every one of your neighbors and every one of your Facebook contacts, right, in order to do that. We have to get people out to the discussion about transportation and talking about how important it is. And again, that doesn't mean you agree with everything we're doing. Far, far from it, right? But come into the dialogue and be constructive in order to allow these agencies that are working here in California to be successful and to bring these improvements, because ultimately we all need them, or we come to a stop. There isn't a legitimate answer. When you ask people, okay, if we don't invest in these multimodal transportation options, what would you suggest? And generally speaking, there is no answer. There is no answer to that question, or the question is about a bigger share of a smaller pot. Just do buses, right? Just do light rail, just do high-speed rail, just do commuter rail. We cannot think like that. We have to break down that barrier amongst ourselves and go out and be an advocate for all of them. That's the only way we'll be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I expect, I lost my program. It's getting late in the day, at least for me. I'm surprised there's not a forest of hands with comments, questions, suggestions. Mike.
Michelle, I was just wondering, can you comment as to what high-speed rail is? There's some discussion between high-speed rail and Metrolink in terms of increasing the frequency of Metro trains as a form of pressure thing. We're building this service to operate. What are you going to do regionally down here to match us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that may be one of the big myths out there is that we're, the various large agencies here are working on things or thinking about things without talking to each other. We talk to each other all the time about what's going on, and we are absolutely looking at that, but that is part of what I talked about earlier, the brand, right? Because the answer needs to be something in order to make sure that we've got those connective trips, right? Because high speed's going to be doing a north-south, high-capacity urban corridor. We need to be getting people in east-west to that corridor and to other interim stops as well, because high-speed rail is going to not stop at every station, obviously. And so we talk about that all the time, and that's where something like Rosecrans Marquardt comes up, right? We need that permission to have that capacity to run more trains. Just by opening up LA Union Station as a dwell station, we can run like 100 more trains a day through here, for instance, right? If we've got the slots, right? So we've got to upgrade the corridor, we've got to unlock the slots, we've got to determine what service runs them, because LOSEM could run them too, right? They're now a locally governed JPA, so they've got a dog in this hunt. So we need to take a look at that, and then we need to take a look at getting them the operating dollars to do it, right? And so it's multifaceted, and we talk about this all the time, because on day one, we don't want, the train to be 30 minutes out when high-speed rail leaves. Right? We want the train to come in, drop the passengers, get on high speed, and have them be able to make the trip. You're welcome. partially. We are funding $600,000 of the electrification. The rest of that package is being locally generated. So this is another example where if we get the agencies together to do something, everybody gives a little bit, and it's a little bit less painful, and we can start building. They just finished their environmental document. It's out for circulation. There have been some challenges to it. The goal for the completion of that electrification, I'm sorry to say because that's Northern California, not my place. I don't know what it is right now, but I believe that it's within the next 5 to 6 years.
So I was having a conversation with somebody about exactly where the placement of the high-speed rail would be over lunch here at Union Station. So I was hoping maybe you could discuss a little bit. I know there were some plans on essentially having it swipe off to the north. Is that still the plan? Has that changed? What's the latest on that?
So we are in discussions right now with LA Metro, and this is all pending, obviously, their board approval. But we're talking now about bringing high-speed rail into, where are we? Into the existing yard.
Okay.
That is the current discussion. Not putting high-speed rail, because again, what we want to create are multimodal transportation hubs. And the key to that is putting all the services as close together as you can. There's been a master plan effort that showed a high-speed station at Denny's, right? There's been some other things that, right over there. There's been some studies, by the high-speed rail that showed it, floating over the existing yard. Right now, we are working very, very closely with Metro staff to see if we could indeed, with those improvements, and with all of the trains having to spend less time in the yard here, if we can actually just bring our trains into the yard right now. Now, there is a lot that needs to be done. We need to finish that script project. That is predicated, this plan is predicated on that. And we need to take a look at and finish the concourse project that the master plan described, because if we have all of that service in the future, we probably can't cram everybody into the historic alleyway, right? Where today we see everybody doing the subway sprint, right? So anyway, that's what we're looking at right now, more as it comes, but that creates a dramatically different and improved rail service for all of Southern California if we can do that one simple thing and bring high-speed rail into the yard.
One more question before we go on.
Oh, yeah. There's tremendous opposition, especially in the North Valley, to that segment between Palmdale and Burbank, probably from the opposition to Burbank, LA segment. So every time there is a meeting, busloads of people, residents, concerned citizens are taken to these meetings. They kind of take over these meetings, and they have all these fears about high-speed rail. And I don't think their fears, or there's been enough outreach to them. I mean, they're convinced that it's going to lower their property values, it's going to threaten their homes, destroy the environment, and they're not satisfied with any of the routes. They don't want a tunnel, they don't want a train anywhere. So they're on a crusade to stop it completely. And I think maybe it's too late, but I think we should maybe reach out to these neighborhood councils, community meetings, or somehow, because they're so convinced this is going to bring a disaster to the community. I mean, you're speaking to us, and generally we're supportive, but so many of them are absolutely fearful of change.
So
and they have been taking things like widening the 5, having smart lanes and everything that don't make sense. So we're dealing with really well-funded opposition. How do we?
So I've been to every single one of those neighborhood councils, many of them on more than one occasion, to talk about the project. We have talked very, very specifically with several of the groups that have coalesced there on a regular basis. They have talked to our engineers. We have done field visits with these folks. So we are talking to them on a regular basis. At the end of the day, this isn't unique to high-speed rail. Think about the subway, right? That Metro, when Metro went to extend the subway all the way to Santa Monica, There were certain areas that were very, very concerned about it and created opposition groups. Think about the expo line. I think that if Daryl's still in here, he knows a little bit about, the concerns. Hey, like, straight up, these are big pieces of infrastructure. There is no getting around the fact that we are building a big project, right? But we can build it in a way that it is a good neighbor, and I can guarantee you that it increases the property value when it's completed. And that's the message that we really need to be sending. It's not a message that the High-Speed Rail Authority can own, right? Our job is to build a high-speed rail. I'm not here to tell people, what their economic future looks like. But at the end of the day, basically in the United States, we've never built a transportation project we haven't loved to death, right? And better connectivity to your community directly translates into economic growth and success and property values rising. So those are the things that we need to take a look at, but we need to be really careful with it because it is very real. The fears, the concerns, they're really real, right? If this project is going to become your neighbor, we need to make sure we sit down and we have that conversation, that we take those people to other neighborhoods that are now neighbors, Marmion Way, right? Expo Line. And they can see what it's like now to have a project, maybe not exactly like high-speed rail, but in terms of magnitude and geography, somewhat similar, so that they can understand what it's like and the fact that their community can thrive with high-speed rail ultimately, rather than be, in perpetuity damaged by it. Can we do one more? Yeah. Okay. And one more?
What's the timeline of the Bakersfield-Palmdale EIS? Seems to have disappeared.
No, actually it hasn't disappeared. That's awesome. So we are organized. The High-Speed Rail has an office in Sacramento. We have 3 regional offices. We have one in Northern California in San Jose, one in the Central Valley, and one in Southern California. Our office here is at the Metropolitan Water District building. So we're on campus at LA Union Station, and I am the director of that office. We oversee out of that office everything from Bakersfield south. So we have 4 sections of the Phase 1 project. We have Bakersfield to Palmdale, Palmdale to Burbank, Burbank to LA, LA to Anaheim, about 170 miles. And then we also oversee the Phase 2 project, LA to San Diego, about 170 miles. Again, very dependent on what alternatives are selected. We recently completed a round of outreach meetings on Bakersfield to Palmdale. So we were up in the Edison community, we were in the Tehachapis, and we were on the south side of the Tehachapi Mountains doing outreach. And our goal is to complete the environmental document there by the end of 2017. So just for frame of reference, we have actually a goal to complete the environmental documents for Bakersfield to Anaheim by the end of 2017. We are trying to complete 170 miles of environmental documentation for this project in the next 2 years. And we've been working on these projects for a long time. They were originally scoped in the 2007-2008 timeframe, so there's been a lot of activity. We've gained a lot of information from a variety of communities about, what's important in those communities, the things that we need to be looking at in order to be successful. And we are optimistic that we can do this. We can do this if everybody puts their shoulders against this, and we work towards finding good answers to the hard problems in the hard areas, and we just keep moving it forward. And so everybody needs to have a voice in that. We need to make sure that we have the full spectrum of perspective on these projects when we go out and have community meetings. It is really, really important. It is critically important that we have the perspective of the people that are very afraid of the project and opposed to the project. But we need the other side of that spectrum as well. We need a balanced voice from the public for these projects. That is the most important and critical thing we can do, not just for high-speed rail, but for Raymer to Bertson, right? For Brighton to Roxford, for those double-track projects that Paul was talking about. We want to create these high-capacity urban corridors. We've got to make sure that there is a balanced narrative going on at the public level about all of these projects.
It's dauntingly large, the high-speed rail projects, and looking back, perhaps it would have been better to do it in small bites. I don't know what the answer would have been, but it is what it is. We have a project. But as far as I can tell, it's the only high-speed project that we have in the state of California. And just like Amtrak, and just like a lot of other institutions, it's there, you support it, even with its imperfections, or you go without. That's my 2 cents worth. And here we are. My colleague and friend here, Mark Earhart from the city of Burbank, we both serve on the Transportation Commission. We're in no doubt whatsoever what fun and games we're going to have in Burbank in trying to solve all the problems, not just with getting high-speed rail through, but at the same time with an airport, and an airport that wants to build a new terminal very close to where the high-speed rail station is supposed to be. And we're, as one of the city council members, we don't want to dig a hole and then fill it in and then have to come back and dig another hole. We're trying to do something rational and make the whole thing look like one project. Anyway, again, thank you very much, Michelle. And now for something completely different. I don't know about you guys, I grew up with darn socks and patched jeans. We didn't always have the money for new stuff. And I think that our next presentation from Dave Cook from Rail Propulsion Systems is a bit like that. I don't like throwing away stuff that still has life in it. I think that we should try and recycle and reuse equipment for as long as possible, especially if it can be improved and enhanced. So Dave is going to talk about, he won't be insulted, I'm sure, if I talk to him as being our resident mad scientist, because he talks my ear off another time on the phone with all this technical stuff that I really only half understand. But the key is that there are locomotives out there which may be a couple of decades old, but that isn't that old in the life of a locomotive. And if we can squeeze more value out of it by rebuilding it and enhancing it, it's good for everybody. So Dave, thanks very much for coming. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Paul, for inviting us again. My name is David Cook. Paul just gave me a nice introduction. So up front, just wanted to clarify, we're taking an all-above-the approach. So I'm going to be saying some things that are not so positive about some of the newer locomotives you're going to see. That's for contrasting. There's about 80 new locomotives being purchased for the state of California, and we need them. We need more locomotives. The problem is there's kind of a backlash and a rush to scrap the old locomotives or to let them fall into disrepair and then complain that they're less than the new ones. So just so you have my perspective from the beginning, you'll understand where we're going. So I could talk for a very long time. We're going to hit a couple different subjects, but 3 technical subjects. So first I'll touch on natural gas, and that's because I have to. That's how all this started. That'll be real brief. And then we're going to talk about after-treatment, because that's what we're currently doing today. And then we're going to talk about hybridization of passenger trains, because we think that's the future. So, RPS is actually a consortium of several smaller companies. They would be EF and EE, Energy Conversions. I'll mention them where their products show up. So, we have a philosophy of getting commuter rail to near zero emissions, which is well beyond Tier 4. And our plan, it's in 3 phases. We plan to start with just cleaning up, rebuilding and cleaning up the old locomotives to very close to Tier 4. But you cannot get a 2-cycle EMD engine to Tier 4. Even EMD admits that, and they're working on a new 4-stroke engine to carry forward for freight locomotives. Then we plan on hybridizing the passenger trains by the addition of a second locomotive. And I don't think this works, does it? No. And then, so that's the second phase. We hybridize it, we get additional acceleration, better performance, lower greenhouse gases, all kinds of benefits come from that. And it's a basically plug into the train. And then later on, we'll talk about alternative fuels, which for rail, the only practical one is natural gas, and or wireless power transfer, or intermittent electrification. So the first subject, I call this conventional wisdoms, because there's several of them. It isn't just conventional wisdom, different people have different thoughts. But these currently, for current passenger locomotives, basically the older EMD-based ones for the main part, is that they're not clean enough, they're not fast enough, and newer is cheaper. The first one is true and easily fixed, and the other two, we have some thoughts that are different on. So I brought this directly from one of AQMD's presentation. Basically, the chart on the left, the green bars show you how much NOx is in, I believe, being put into the atmosphere per year. The red dashed line tells you where we have to be to meet air standards, and as the blue bars go down up to 2023, that is actually the plan to reduce emissions. So from the South Coast AQMD's perspective, combustion is on its way out. That's conventional wisdom. You're not going to get there from here without doing something different. And on the bottom right is your slide where they say combustion's up. So that leads to the alternative is electrification. So some notes on electrification. It's happening in places like Caltrain Peninsula, which I'll talk a little bit later about when. Does it work? I'll use it later. Okay. So one of the challenges for, especially in the Metrolink area, I live in Fullerton, so this is where my knowledge comes from. Electrification is a significant challenge, although not impossible. One of the major problems is freight rail and double stacks. So yes, you can put catenary wire above a double stack train, but you have to raise every bridge that it goes through, or you have intermittent catenary. And I haven't seen that done. I haven't done extensive research. The cost of electrification is considerable. The rule of thumb from people that talk about it is greater than 10 million a mile. And the other big issue with electrification is it ends. And Caltrain is a good example of all 3 of these. Right now they're spending $1.5 billion for 47 miles. These are kind of the latest figures I looked up the other day. That's 32 million a mile. And that's not just electrification. There are other projects in there, but that gives you a range from 10 million to 3.2 million a mile. And if this were Metrolink, that would come out to $4 to $9 billion to electrify. The other one is Caltrain, when they electrify, is going to end at San Jose. So if you want to go to Gilroy, your electric train's going to stop. You don't have to get off. You don't have to get on a diesel train, go the rest of the way to Gilroy. Electrification still covers probably 90 to 95% of the route, but these are just issues to point out with electrification as a solution to the emission problem. The second one we talked about was conventional locomotives aren't fast enough. So these are the new locomotives that Metrolink, I believe, has orders for 40. They've funded 29. They're on the way to 40. Siemens up in Sacramento is using a different engine manufacturer, Cummins, and as of today, I believe there are 69 ordered by Illinois, Caltrain, and I believe Michigan. All of them are north of $6 million a copy, and this is after large group buys. The original order for the EMDs, it came in at $7.5 million. So the big thing about these is that one of the big things is that they're high speed, they're capable of 125 miles an hour, which is a selling point and is something that we can't make an old locomotive do. They're also single engine, they use SCR, they meet Tier 4. The argument we have towards the conventional wisdom is commuter rail doesn't go far enough between stops to ever reach speeds greater than 100 miles an hour. And these two charts here, now it's good that I have a pen. So you can see the blue line, this is an acceleration curve for what would be a typical Metrolink train or a Surfliner. That's 3,000 horsepower, that's 6 bi-level cars. And by the way, everybody wants to go to longer trains, which they add 1, 2, or 4 more bi-levels. So you can see here that that curve stops at 100 miles an hour after you've gone 16 miles. So it takes 16 miles to reach 100. And if you had 3,800 horsepower, which is what we consider the Siemens Charger, after you subtract the head power from the 4,200, you would get 110 miles an hour, but it took you a distance of 16 miles. The average Surfliner stop is 14 miles. If they don't do the coaster stops down by San Diego, it drops to 9.9. Metrolink is a 6.4. And Chicago Metro's example I like to pull up, they're at 2.5 miles before stops. So we debate the need to buy new locomotives for the high-speed capability, although it is a capability to have. The next argument is that newer locomotives are cheaper. We've been hearing this lately. Rebuilds are quoted to only be good for 10 more years. Chicago Metro, again, using them as an example, they just commissioned 40 rebuilds out of a fleet of 140 locomotives, and these are F40s of different flavors. And they're paying $2.1 million a piece. These are expected to be rebuilt to almost new condition with many of the upgrades that a newer locomotive would have, except the downside, they're keeping the original engine and you're only getting Tier 0 plus emissions. So they're not much cleaner. They're slightly cleaner, but not much. The upside, they're a third the cost of new, and they have the same reliable medium-speed engine. Metrolink, for example, has been running their F-59 since they purchased them in the early 90s, and a good number of them have not been rebuilt yet. So the history of these locomotives says a lot about how long. I think it argues that 10 more years is not what you're going to get out of a good rebuild if you do a full rebuild. If you just do a low-cost rebuild and you don't fully remanufacture locomotive, that may be a true statement, but I think the math can be done both ways. So that is conventional wisdom. I said I'd talk about natural gas very briefly. So natural gas is ready for 2 applications of rail, passenger and switchers. It's been done in transit buses, it's been done in school buses, it's been done in trash trucks. It was done at LA Junction on 4 LNG switchers. Napa Valley Wine Train's been running it since 2002. Valley Railroad in Brazil has been doing it, and 2 of the major Class 1s are now experimenting with LNG locomotives. So if you're ever up in Napa Valley Wine, Napa Valley, they have the wine train that's been running since 2002 with number 73. And Norfolk Southern is currently putting a mother slug switcher in that is a direct replacement for the diesel counterpart it replaces. And that's why I caveat the natural gas is ready, is when you're talking about switchers and certain passenger applications, not all. And Energy Conversions is the company that's been doing it. After treatment, in 2009 through 2010, one of our partner companies, EF&EE, worked with Metrolink and South Coast and did a SCR experiment on an old F-59. It was Unit 865, it was not rebuilt, and they achieved a 70% NOx reduction and a 60% PM reduction with this first iteration. It had multiple first-generation problems, and then it had 2 fundamental problems, which is why it wasn't explored much further. It had a urea mixing challenge and low exhaust temperatures. And therefore, Metrolink, at this point, this was kind of a plan B or a quick look before they bought new locomotives, and they decided to buy new locomotives after doing this for 2 years. We, working with EF&E, have come up with a new system that solves the 2 fundamental issues, which was low temperature and mixing by combining the HEP engine and the main engine. And the other issues have to be done over time with durability and putting one in service. This is a quick slide to talk about what the fleet looks like, and I'm just going to pass over that. this is where we're at. We're currently doing this for North Carolina. That's their logo up on the upper right. They supplied us with a test locomotive and some funds to do a demonstration. So this is currently in process. We've been working on the locomotive since April, and we did baseline testing in October, and this thing should be shipping to NCDOT in the next month or so, and it should be in service in NCDOT first quarter. So that covers after treatment. This is the important subject for us. This is hybridization. And we just talked about how we don't see that high speed is needed. What we really think is that quickness is needed. Basically, the commuter rail, the business of the locomotive is accelerating the locomotive and stopping it, and doing it frequently. So this is a comparison between the technology we're proposing and the technology that exists. And the important two numbers are here at the bottom, half a kilowatt hour and 112 kilowatt hours. Basically, a conventional Metrolink train is just over 100 transit buses. So it's a definite scale up of the technology. One of the things in our favor is that buses were difficult because there weren't electric motors to start with, and trains should be a relatively straightforward approach because of the low rolling resistance and the fact that they have electric motors already. What we are proposing, and I brought this up in the first picture, is basically a B unit. So it's something that was done in passenger rail early with diesels, is what we're bringing back. And basically, it's the zero emissions booster locomotive. We nicknamed it the ZEBL. It's a self-contained, it's its own locomotive. It has its own traction motors. There are no new wires going through it. It connects to the conventional MU cables. It connects to the conventional HEP cables. The only thing that needs to be done in the control locomotive is the addition of a little control box. This is kind of it laid out in the drawing. So basically, you can see the ZEBL back here with the energy storage and its own traction motors. And you have, this could be a new EMD locomotive, a new Siemens locomotive, or a rebuilt older locomotive with an SCR system, and you add the control box. The benefit is you get a 4,000 horsepower boost, and you also get backup propulsion using the HEP generator, because through the HEP cabling of the ZEBL, we can tie the two engines together. So this is the basic technology we're proposing. This is the performance aspect of what happens when you do this. The red line is that typical diesel acceleration curve, similar to the chart we showed earlier. And the green line is the hybrid locomotive accelerating. And this is a 4-mile chart. And some interesting things happen when you do this. Because you accelerated the hybrid locomotive faster, you end up at a lower peak speed to stop at the same point in the same amount of time. So what this means is you're getting 2 bites at the apple for efficiency. The first one is the fact that you captured all that energy when you slowed the train down in regenerative braking. And the second is you lost all that high-speed drag because power is a function of the square velocity. So this opens up a commuter railroad to 3 different modes of operation that they couldn't do before. Conventional passenger railroads would have to run the train, determine how long it takes to get from point A to point B with a certain amount of horsepower, a certain amount of weight, and they set a little padding in there, and that becomes your train schedule. And if you do something like I believe Metrolink's doing today on LA to San Bernardino, and you add 2 cars, you need to add another locomotive or you need to change your schedule. So once you hybridize a train, you can either run at the same schedule and get very high efficiency because you lower this peak speed. You can run longer trains in the same schedule, or you can, at peak commute, you can just decide not to worry about efficiency and let the hybrid system take you up to track speed rather rapidly and run more trains in the same time slot. So this is a study that we did for Caltrain using 5 cars. Basically, it reduced, It reduced the fuel consumption on a one-way trip in the simulation from 115 gallons to 58 gallons. It's knocking on the door 50%. we could accommodate 6 or 7 coaches in the same schedule and still consume less fuel than the original train did. And this, I nicknamed this the poster child of hybridization because of the short distance, and is probably a significant factor in why they're electrifying, because it makes sense in this application, very high dense. Metrolink did a case study from LA to San Bernardino, and in this route their average stop distance is about 4 miles. The energy reduction was only 36%, not close to 50. Let's see, if you had 3 round trips per day, that's 256 gallons per day of savings. And also we could pull a 10-car train in the same schedule as they currently pull a 6-car train. Another thing, once in addition to the concept of just basic hybridization, is if you can start transferring electricity to the system, whenever the train stops at a station or as it's slowing down, you can actually displace even more diesel fuel. So in the Caltrain simulation, if you could transfer 20 kilowatt hours of power every time the train stopped, you would reduce the fuel, the energy use by 22%. So essentially at 40 kilowatt hours of energy transfer, which is a significant challenge, you are basically 90% of an electric railroad. Again, this is another plug for NCDOT. We're currently in talks with NCDOT to try to find funding to put one of these in motion. It'd have to be done in a way that the FRA would approve. It'd probably be done at low performance. The reason NCDOT is a good candidate for this is they currently run 2 trains a day where they wide turn their trains at each end with 2 trains a day. And they're going to 3 trains a day, which means they need to do push-pull train sets. And what they're going to do is they're going to take and build a CCU, which is basically an old locomotive. They take the engine out, and they're going to connect it to the diesel locomotive. And they're going to run these at the head end of the train, and when they get to the location, they're going to disconnect it, slide back, and just reconnect, and then have a locomotive cab at the other end. They're not going to run cab cars. So anyway, that makes them a perfect candidate for hybridization because they're already carrying around a second locomotive that we just have to reinstall the traction motors and install the energy storage and power electronics. In addition, as a railroad, this is why they first contacted ECI and started a relationship with RPS and ECI, is they're interested in doing dual fuel. So they're actually reaching out and we're looking into it. The challenge with doing natural gas is you never have a place to put the energy. Well, what happens when you put a Zeeble or a CCU on is now you have the whole bottom of one locomotive to put additional fuel, and therefore they're a good candidate for dual fuel. So this is basically a picture of what we're proposing for railroads such as Surfline or Metrolink, which is basically the F-59 with the blended after-treatment system, a Zeeble with hybrid energy storage, CNG storage in the bottom. You end up with 100 to 225% increase in impulse power depending on what platform you make the Zeeble out of. You can run longer trains, more trains in the same time period. You end up with redundant power systems. So now you have 3 power systems. You have the prime engine, the HEP engine, and the battery system. And if either engine fails, you will have the capacity to limp to the next station or continue the whole route and just do it at a lower speed. We can achieve almost wireless electrification with the addition of wireless power transfer, which we're not talking about how you do that yet here, but it's because of the application, it's now a viable possibility. And we get to keep the medium 2-cycle EMD engine that we're really fond of, that they just have a long life and a good reliability, but they're challenged to meet the current emissions. And I just hit 20 minutes, and that's my last slide, so I apologize for so much stuff.
What they did say, of course, is this is homegrown. This is in Anaheim, California. And Dave and his partner went to Cal Poly.
Yes.
So this is local production. And I think it's very exciting. The sad news is that, try as he might, Dave's had a real difficult time getting people powers that be in Southern California to pay attention to it. We've tried also with, you might have seen some of this stuff in steel wheels and through other avenues, but it just seems to me that if somebody is given a whole boatload of taxpayers' money, they don't have much incentive to try and figure out what's the cheapest and the best way of doing something. They just go out and buy new stuff. But anyway, we wish Dave well. We wish the state of North Carolina well, because they seem to be the innovators here, and wish that we could get some interest in California. Anybody got any questions? Look at Susan, I thought you did.
Westchester,
We
so
can end up here.
but it seems like, I mean, I want to know that running about the 84 Olympics.
Thank you. I've followed this story for a long time. I think this is excellent. And I'm sorry that, you know, you couldn't provide the locomotives, but this is a small question on, I think it's 10, the Napa Valley train. Is that an old Santa Fe Chief that was reconverted?
No, that was an Alco. I'm not sure which version of the Alco, but what they put into it was a 12-cylinder roots-blown EMP engine out of a switcher locomotive. And that is currently running on 100% CNG using pre-chips. And that's what Norfolk Southern is running in their switchers. So they're doing a 16-cylinder version from a GP38 based on the work that was done in that line train.
Okay, and then this is a related question. Why are those 14 locomotives sitting down in Union Station? Anybody know?
Which 14 you?
14, on track 15, there are 14 BNSN.
Somebody got the answer to that? Yes, I do. Hello?
Well, when I got started in this, the best thing was that they did save as much as they could.
Comes from the incident that happened in Oxnard and Chatsworth. Resolution is re-abandoning and looking at.
Of course, that would never happen without the same amount of trauma. That's what
We
they
deal
did.
with BNSF, at least 40 freight units to be put on the point until they figure out how to redesign the campus. So they're leasing
I
them
haven't
for 1
heard
year.
anything from them
So
lately.
that's the reason you see they're
Why are
being
they
delivered.
why are they sitting there?
So they put them.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, question about these locomotives?
Could you explain wireless electrification?
Yes, actually, it's relatively, it's not new. It's been around for a long time, but its commercial application is new. There are several companies doing it for transit buses. So they do a battery bus, and there's a coil in the ground, and there's a coil in the bus. And when the bus parks right above the coil, let people on off, they transfer power. So they're currently at about 50 kilowatts. When I talk about transferring 20 kilowatt hours in 40 seconds, we're doing that at 2 megawatts. That, just to be clear, that's not a trivial idea. But it is possible. I mean, you have to disperse the passenger cars or come up with one big wireless power transfer pad. But it's starting happening for electric cars too. It's a way of charging a car with plug-in.
Coming back and forth, and that was the beginning of LoSAP. Was these city
Yeah, it essentially makes, and another,
San Diego.
right, and another feature of our technology is when the train gets to the station, if you plug in the HEP cables with shore power, you're charging the battery. You know, because the HEP cables go right through the Z-bolt, you don't have to add, that's another clever part of this, it's plug and play, there's no changes to what you already have, and we just interface with the HEP cables and the MU cables, and a little box that you put in the control.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, I live in a mobile home.
Quick question. You were talking about powertrain and just stops in San Jose. In the East End, we used dual mode locomotives for years. Is there any questions about efficiencies with the dual mode?
Oh, I'm familiar with dual mode. I know New Jersey Transit has them and AMT has some. Usually dual mode locomotives have smaller diesel engines because of the space constraint.
This guy was sort of.
So I did some lookup on the ALP 46s I believe New Jersey Transit has, and I think in diesel mode they're good for 3,000 horsepower. And in electric mode, the transformer, like a normal electric, they're good for 5,000. But no, that's another option that Caltrain can do. But now you have an electric locomotive and a diesel locomotive in the same chassis.
But it would have cost over $1,000 for the permit and like $200.
I have a clarification question. The wireless transfer motivation, somewhere in the last 3 months I read an article about a light rail system in Dubai where the power is coming up from the ground and
Is that an example of that?
Bombardier is currently, has some literature out, you can find it if you look, they're doing 200 kilowatt systems. So they can transfer 200 kilowatts. So if you did that for an hour, that would be 200 kilowatt hours. So right now, the biggest system that's out there is 200 kilowatts, and it is Bombardier on a light rail application, actually. So I didn't even think to mention that. This isn't even something new I'm mentioning. This is just something that our technology allows you to do with the current passenger train.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Whose was the point?
2016.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. We should do a crowdfunding or something so we can go on a prototype if the geniuses at Metrolink
We're
will
going
pay
to start
for
at
it.
140 something, and we had 100 in about 2020.
Who wouldn't come to Buffalo to Southern California in December?
Basically, half.
Here's my introduction to Bruce. Bruce Becker, Dwayne County, come over to represent NARP from far frozen north of New York State. And I think, we usually ask this question, how many people represent NARP? We usually get almost everybody as an NARP and the RailPAC joint member. So, Bruce, welcome. And Bruce is going to give us an update on what's happening in DC.
We're going to go through it, and then I have plenty of time for questions, hopefully. Again, welcome. Very glad to be here today. Indeed, I do live in beautiful Buffalo, New York. I am based out of our national office in Washington. I do travel down to Washington about 2 weeks a month. Out on the road at great events like this, so a lot of the time and telecommute from home. I've been on the staff of NARP now for 6 months. I started back in the middle of May. Before that, I've been a NARP member for over 25 years. I was on the board of directors as a board member for the last 6 years. And just to keep me off the street corners, I am still the president of the Empire State Passengers Association there at State Group. My wife keeps reminding me it's been 14 years, so we'll see if we can work on that at some point. But I'm very glad to be here today. Beautiful weather, obviously. We have not had snow in Buffalo yet, so just to live that down, we have not had it yet. Doesn't mean it's not going to be coming. So let's talk about what has happened on the national front. It's been a very good year, culminated yesterday by President Obama signing in the Surface Transportation Bill, which has the rail title in it. That means Amtrak is on the Surface Transportation Bill for the first time in Amtrak's history. That's a big deal. A lot that into getting to that point. I know you can't read all this, I'll sort of paraphrase. The NARP certainly influenced the outcomes. That's a picture of Senator John Thune, a Republican from South Dakota, who is the chair of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. When the Senate marked up their original dry-back version of the transportation bill, gave us a shout-out, gave NARP a shout-out on the floor of the Senate. We had a 15-minute warning before that occurred. Staff called us and said, turn the TV on, you want to see this, and it was a great thing. Senator Thune has been a tremendous supporter this year of including rail, and we need to remember, are from South Dakota. There are no Amtrak trains in South Dakota. That's significant. We've developed new champions across the country, particularly Senator Roger Wicker, again, a Republican from Mississippi, really turned into a major supporter for the efforts to get rail into the Surface Transportation Bill. Again, I know you can't probably read all that text. Not important. This was a quote from the confirmation hearing for FRA Director Sarah Feinberg. It talked about the Gulf Coast Service, how important the restoration of Gulf Coast Service is to this senator, to the states of Mississippi and Alabama. Again, a Republican. Also at that same hearing, I was at that hearing, so I witnessed this all in person. Here is a quote, we helped change minds. Here's Stephen Daines, Republican from Montana, who started his testimony in front of Sarah Feinberg, talking about how important the Empire Builder is to his state. We 10 years ago, would we have seen 3 Republicans being as vocal about this? Perhaps not. We're glad we have it today. Has a sea change occurred? Back earlier in the year, when the House was working on their appropriations for FY16 for Amtrak, its House leadership had a hunt for a Republican congressman to put up amendments to kill Amtrak. That's a change. falling over each other. Who was going to be the person to put up those amendments? Ultimately, Representative Bo Brooks of Alabama came up and came to the rescue. He had 2 amendments that were put into that funding bill that, again, has not moved forward. But both amendments were soundly defeated, both defeating an amendment to zero operating grant for Amtrak, soundly defeated, and amendment for capital improvements also soundly defeated. Why did they go through this exercise? So that some Republicans go on the record that they voted against Amtrak. Solely. NARP was very active in the formation, the drafting of the Senate Drive Act, which is what was then the compromise in the conference committee over the last several weeks that got us to the FAST Act, which we're going to cover in a couple of minutes, what happened on surface transportation. From our standpoint, from the national perspective of representing rail passengers around the country, this was tremendous. We, for the first time, we being staff, were in the room as the legislation was being drafted. We were being consulted. What do you think about this? What will you add? What will you take out? There were 7 drafts that we participated in before the Drive Act went ultimately to the floor of the Senate and where it was passed by a very good margin. And again, that led to the fact that passenger rail is a title, and rail is a title in general, the Surface Transportation Act, the FAST Act, which again was signed into law yesterday by the President. So all great stuff, and from the NARP standpoint, and from representing all of you, major accomplishment. Let's touch on quickly some of the things that NARP in Washington took under its wing this year, some of the projects and initiative. We certainly supported the confirmation of Sarah Feinberg as FRA Administrator. I was at both of her confirmation hearings up on the Hill. We assisted in regional efforts to preserve the Indiana's Hoosier State Service. That was certainly, this time last year was in question. It was in question beginning of 2015. The train is running today. We provided a lot of significant background information and fact-checking in the wake of the tragic Philadelphia derailment. That was my first day in the job in the NARP office. I woke up that morning to hear about the derailment. I said, this will be an interesting first day in the office dealing with that. I can assure you it was. Fortunately, we have a very good rapport with much of the media. They called us and said, okay, here's what we want to report. What do you think? Does it make sense? And of course, the media does not understand the subtleties, the intricacies, and the technological issues involved. So we did a lot of background on letting them understand, as well we understood at that point in time, the tragic incident that occurred. After they worked to advance the Gateway Tunnel project between New Jersey and New York City, far removed from all of you in California, but a very significant national project. If that project does not move forward, at this point it's coalescing that it will, whether we like to argue about whether it's no Northeast Corridor or not, that's very, very important for support around the country. We have worked with the rail industry partners to ensure the extension for the PTC deadline, a very real problem. Fortunately, Congress got that pretty quick. It was sort of amazing. Normally you don't get these too quick, but they got that pretty quick. That was really through the efforts of many different groups, including the Association of American Railroads, who emphasized that the extension was not passed. There would be no chlorine transport by rail car, which would mean there would be no fresh water in this country. That was a real point that really hit home on that very quickly. And again, we've certainly also assisted regional efforts in support of the All Aboard Florida, or now what they're calling the White Line project between Miami and Orlando, Texas Central project between Dallas and Houston, and certainly the high-speed rail initiatives here in California. We've also certainly addressed Amtrak concerns. As we all are aware, Amtrak undertook its Silver Star dining car termination experiment, much to all of our chagrin. We recognize at that point Amtrak is under the pressure, and in the FAST Act that was signed yesterday, they are required to eliminate losses in food and beverage within 5 years. That's a federal mandate. That's not their choice to do that. That's a federal mandate. They do have to do something. Did they do it the way it should have been done? No. Did they do it communicated properly? Probably not. And they admit they probably rushed into things, didn't communicate it very well. What we touched on, it wasn't Amtrak, it was Congress forcing them to do this. This morning we did hear a mention about a certain representative from Florida who likes to have his hamburger hanging up there, Mr. John Micah, which of course is Amtrak's one of his biggest, their biggest issues with the food and everything. But our campaign on the dining car bag was a message that you could have a bag. You can go on our website today and order one for yourself to carry. You can also order one and go deliver it to your representative's office in Congress. With information in the bag saying, here's why you should not be micromanaging the dining car service. It's a necessary part of the train. It's a necessary part of getting passengers to ride. Leave it alone. We certainly have also very strongly communicated with Amtrak concerning its random or seemingly random destaffing of stations, particularly out in the national network. There have been several examples of that over the last several months. We're not having real groundwork or groundswell of understanding what they're doing. We don't think they necessarily understand what they're doing, but that's still a work in progress, definitely affecting the national system. We continue to have regular meetings, both formal and informal, with Amtrak officials in D.C. Very frankly, walking through Union Station, I get more information out of that than I do having a meeting with folks up there. Bump into people, you know, so you see who you know. When it's a formal meeting, everybody, of course, is in their corners, and everything's been sanitized. So it's a combination of all those things. Some association-focused initiatives. We have instituted a new membership database, so all of you who are NARP members in the room now have the ability to control your own membership status, information, email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, going onto the NARP website. You can renew online. You can print your membership card online now, so you do not need to wait to get stuff in the mail. You can do it all yourself. It was a major step forward for us. We have vastly increased our social media outlet through all the normal platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everything like that. We also this year had a very concerted effort to enter into new industry partnerships. 3 significant ones, COMTO, which is the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, representing transit operators around the country. We're now a formal partner with that organization. I attended their annual convention and conference up in Boston back in July. Great networking opportunity. WTS, which is Advancing Women in Transportation, and APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. Amazingly, NARP had never been an affiliate member of APTA until this year, so we're now an official member, which gives us credence at the table, which is a great thing. We've obviously felt involved with them for years, but you got to be a member if you're going to play the game, so we're very happy about that. And we also developed a number of new sponsorships this year, which obviously helped our bottom line, and we're continuing to look for corporate sponsors going forward. Let's see here. NARP, at our fall meeting in Indianapolis, we held our first ever multi-track, publicly focused advocacy and learning day. Our fall meeting is held around different spots in the country. We were here in LA 4 years ago, this past year again in Indianapolis. It was the first time that we had to focus on bringing the public local to Indiana into the meeting, into focus on how we can help them be better rail advocates in their local area. And we're going to be continuing that effort. Our meeting next fall in October is in Denver. Denver obviously is a tremendous up-and-coming transit town, and we're going to try to take advantage of that. And our staff outreach has certainly significantly increased. Our president that knew last year, Jim Matthews, was here last year at the meeting. Jim, unfortunately, was not able to come today, which is why you have me. Jim was down in Mobile, Alabama yesterday and today representing NARP and passenger interests with the Southern Rail Commission in the ongoing effort to get Gulf Coast service restored. Jim has made a number of visits. He's been, what did I have, over a dozen states. He's been down to the Gulf Coast a number of times. He doesn't like the heat down there in the summer, so he's trying to limit that down there. But also, we also help with outreach and support to help Kansas and Colorado and New Mexico local folks get the successful Tiger Grant which they have gotten, which is certainly going to help secure the Southwest Chief on his proper route over the Raton Pass, of course. So all good things. I represented NARP at, again, the annual conference of COMTO. I was also up at the APTA annual conference in San Francisco about a month ago. So as you can see, between Jim and I, we are keeping our travel selves busy. So what's happening in the nation's capital? Well, the big news again is the FAST Act. There must be a whole division in Washington about how they come up with these acronyms. You know, PRIDE, FAST, and everything, you know. I'm sure it's a multi-billion-dollar office that does all this. The FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, $305 billion billion, 5-year surface transportation bill. They were looking for 6. For a while they thought it was going to be 3. They settled on 5. The bill passed the House by a lopsided 359 to 65 vote on Wednesday. Passed the Senate by an 83 to 16 vote on Thursday. And again, President Obama signed it into law at a ceremony at the White House midday yesterday. So it is the law of the land. So, I just want to touch on some things, and I'll take questions after we get done. There's all sorts of areas. I mean, the rail title is only 380 pages out of the 1,300 pages. So it is quite comprehensive, but we'll touch on the highlights. National Network, which again we heard this morning, there is a division in authorization funding going forward. National Network, $5.45 billion over the 5 years for National Network. Northeast Corridor, $2.596 billion over those 5 years. Very importantly, it does establish a Gulf Coast working group to, again, advance how you're going to get service back onto that Gulf Coast route. There are many ideas how that might be, whether it will be an extended sunset again like it was, certainly possible, whether it will be some other alternatives, certainly possible too. But this federally mandates that there is plans advanced to get service back onto that corridor. State-supported route committee has been established. I'm from New York State. I can tell you that our DOT in New York State, which certainly supports our corridor service, as with most of the states, has been very concerned over the relationship that they have under Section 209 between Amtrak and themselves. I saw the first invoice the state received. It said New York State DOT, rail services for the month in question, and $1 amount. There was no detail. None of us would authorize $1 million payments if that's the way it was. So it's been a very long uphill battle to get to that. And the writers of the bill recognized that there needed to be a legislatively mandated structure to have all the parties involved. So that's the state-supported route committee. There is $1.13 billion over 5 years for more safety and infrastructure improvements. There is a state-federal partnership for state of good repair authorization of about $1 billion, $997 million over 5 years. Restoration and enhancement grants, this is significant. It is talking about restoring routes that were there previously or looking at new routes. We've not heard either of those words of late in federal legislation. The problem is it's only $100 million over 5 years or $20 million a year. It doesn't buy you a whole lot. But at least it's a start in the right direction on things. Requires Amtrak to reduce 5-year business line and asset plans. That was mentioned this morning. Increases the Amtrak board from 9 to 10 people. Unfortunately, the original DRIVE Act included language that would have required the board to have geographical representation, a balance of representation. It would require board members to be from national network served states. That was not included in the final FAST Act. Requires Amtrak to obtain an independent entity, whatever that means, to review services it should provide. We aren't quite sure how that got in and what it's going to mean, but that's there. Food and beverage reform, we talked about that, requires eliminating Amtrak's F&B loss within 5 years. And again, they've already committed that they were going to do that 3 years ago, so it's sort of that rolling 5 years. Well, 5 years from whenever you say 5 years is from. But it's now in law. Does establish a pilot program for Amtrak's use of locally sourced products and requires Amtrak's participation in local promotional events. I can tell you, I heard more here today from Jay and from Eric about local things on the ground than we ever hear back in New York State or in the Northeast Corridor. I guess distance obviously has a bearing in that. Eric's in the back raising his hand in support of that. All good. Requires the onboard cat and dog program. Well, that's already underway. If you're in the Northeast Corridor, certain trains allow you to bring cats and dogs on the train in the carriers, you make a reservation, whatever. So Amtrak was already proactively working on that issue. Let's see. Requires a pilot program to seek private operations for 3 long-distance trains.
What are those 3 trains?
Any trains somebody wants to bid on. It's nebulous. The wording is very nebulous. It is really reaching out to answer those folks who think that there are private operators out there who would would say, gee, I'd love to take over the Empire builder, and I can make money at it. You can sense my degree of skepticism on that. Certainly if it were possible, who knows? But it does open the door to that. It requires an RFP process to be developed, to solicit those. And again, certainly as we've seen, if you will follow with any degree of detail, the Hoosier State Initiative, which is, again, is only a 4-day-a-week train in a relatively short corridor. There's a lot of challenges that go into that. And Amtrak will always have its fingers in the operation, positively or negatively going forward, because of the operating rights over the freights and over the operating crews. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Requires a report on station boarding procedures. That is mainly, if you've ever been to Penn Station during rush hour, that's where that requirement came out of. You don't like being trampled. Requires station development, right-of-way leveraging report. Somebody thinks that there's a tremendous amount of money being left on the table. I'll have a report about that. Seeks proposals for the finance, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of high-speed rail systems for the 11 federally designated high-speed rail corridors. Let's take California out of the picture. That what they're saying is somebody might want to say, oh, gee, Empire Corridor in New York State, my home state, we want to come forward and be your operator. We'll find out about that. Sort of goes back to the 3 long-distance trains to some degree, perhaps. Northeast Corridor through ticketing study. Probably a good thing, the fact that now if you want to go on a commuter train, you have to get off on the ticket machine. This is the 21st century. We should be able to come up with something on that. Increases Amtrak's liability cap. We talked about that. Yvonne mentioned that this morning. Obviously a direct offshoot of the tragic Philadelphia accident. No question about that. And it authorizes, at the end, $199 million to help fund PTC installation around the country. And that's not specific to Amtrak, that is for all passenger rail carriers, mainly commuter operators. We in the East, again, Metro North has only entered into a contract to develop a system, so it tells you how far off they are from implementation and installation of that. PTC, positive train control. Positive train control, the big elephant in the room in the rail industry over the last several years. If you would freight, class 1s were all here, they would say it was the number one unfunded mandate. We all believe in safety. Obviously, it was the offshoot of the terrible accident out here at Chatsworth a number of years ago. All good. I have many friends in the engineering department in the class 1s. The idea that they could have ever done it by this year, impossible. The technology did not exist to have it done, so it was definitely a requirement that happen. I mean, what is NARP looking for? We have 4 basic goals: promote seamless intermodal connections, a connected America. We're all in agreement. We've talked about this. Many speakers talked about that today. How do you get everybody together? It shouldn't be you have an Amtrak ticket, you have to get off, you get an LA Metro ticket, all this other stuff. How do we get everybody seamlessly together? How do we improve conventional intercity passenger service? Incremental improvements. We certainly support the construction of one true high-speed segment within the next 5 years. We've already heard from California High-Speed Rail, but certainly, again, it's under construction, the only system under construction. And, of course, we always promote and champion safety in all public transportation, be it rail, transit, or any other means. So I'm going to end there. I have other slides, but let me take questions. So I'm sure there's questions on some of those things. And I'm so happy to be here representing what goes on within the Beltway, which is not pretty sometimes, but it's important. Paul, again, thanks for inviting me.
I just want to comment before we take questions. This past legislative session in Sacramento, there were 930 bills, of which the governor, I think, rejected 100 and something or whatever. Just to try, even for a small group like us, just to try and keep up with what's going in Sacramento is nigh on impossible through that legislative process. So just imagine what it takes to keep your finger on the pulse in Washington, D.C. And that's why I would say that for everybody here, you should join NARP to support their efforts. And in the same way, if you're not a RailPAC member, should join us to support our members. I mean, there really is a need to be a member of both organizations, and I strongly recommend them. I mean, it's very important that we support a national group. Again, even if we don't agree with everything that they do and all their policies, it's very